they very often ignore the rule completely. We, as you all know, see that quite often. So, would you then go to court for 17 cents or for 25 cents? The more we let go of legal principles, the more our tolerances grow, the more we start to breach the small rules. Tomorrow it will be another one, those silly laws that we bypass because they're simply rules. So I would suggest to you that this de minimis rule creeps. It creeps along to reach levels of a laid-back comfort and a trust that nothing will go wrong. Nobody is watching anyway. We live in South Africa, some of us even in Joburg. So, well, it reminds me about a case that I did. I think I had about 12 minutes experience as an advocate when I was briefed in a matter with a far more senior advocate. And it was a matter about 17 cents. And I was very anxious to make a good impression and had my own view about the case. And we gathered for the first meeting. And I was quite proud of the fact that I had worked up the whole case and explained that this is the approach I think we should take. But I was slapped down as the junior person, and there was a better way. I was told that we would get success in the end. We went to the High Court and we lost the case and decided, but there's something right, and let's try the other approach, the junior guy's approach. And we went to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and we had a fair hearing. It was all about what the words taking into account would mean in the interpretation of an act, and whether or not it had a particular mathematical meaning. After the matter was heard, very anxiously, the client came out with the attorney. How do you think it went? Trevor wants to know, does he put up the fuel price by 17 cents? You can thank me later, you didn't ever pay that 17 cents. Right, then there's a second rule, ignorantia juris or ignorantia legis neminem excusat. I'm not the only one who thinks it's quite an important one. So does the cartoonist in Peanuts. They've actually considered the rule itself and was doing their utmost to get Snoopy to be taught this very lesson. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. And as you will gather, I think that these two legal maxims are in conflict with one another, and that what I subscribe to is the latter. Do you complain when you don't read a contract? Do you say that I didn't read the fine print of the ticket terms? Are you one of those? You buy a new aircraft, but you think that you might get a new, better, bigger machine at some point, and you don't register it into your name at the appropriate time. You just put a V5 sticker on, I saw now, is a solution to the problem. But I'd suggest between the two rules that the former of the rules very often lead to a latitude, an attitude, an ignorance, a reaming that leads to the harshness of the second rule, the rule that you will not be excused. Now, I mentioned that we live in South Africa and that we have as we all know, a culture of social non-compliance in everyday life. We live in this city, we see it, you saw it today on your way here, most probably. The life is very different in the aviation world. Here, that very same almost lawless society has the highest expectations of everyone involved in aviation. They require of us faultlessness, precision. And those are the very people that might skip over that red light. Now, few professions, I think, are put on as high a pedestal as aviators and perhaps the medical profession. There's one difference, though. People enjoy flying and knocking on your door to fly. We very seldom knock on the doctor's door for pleasure. Now, when I talk about aviators, I want to extend that not only to pilots, but to everyone involved in aviation. Everyone, hangar staff, technical staff, administrative staff, whoever is involved, I am referring to you, and I include students like myself. Encounters with aviators inspire. People are in awe. You will have seen it when the tiger moths came past. People are truly in awe of what it is that you do on a daily basis. Whether you're part of technical staff or anyone else, you engage in the activity of keeping the effects of gravity at bay in a controlled way. And that takes a lot of coordination. Now, because people look up at aviators, I think that it's an ideal situation where you can set an example and make a difference in the way in which you conduct yourselves, not only as far as aviation is concerned, because aviation is one of the few places where you can still give places like South Africa a very good name, and I truly believe that. So, is the law your friend or your foe? What should your attitude be in that regard? Now, I'm going to invite you that it's a no-brainer. You have to befriend the law. It is in that setting that you can, as aviators, bring change in as far as safety is concerned and in our general environment. Now, will you act as someone who befriended the law, or will you merely comply with the law because you must? Or worse, that you'll be complying in fear that you might be caught out for non-compliance. So I invite you to make your attitude of compliance of the law one of pride. And that is an attitude that will, of course, put safety first. So let me ask you a question. Why did you do your pre-flight this morning? Is it because you must? Or is it because you genuinely care about the safety of your family, your passengers, or your crew? Why did you do your pre-flight? So, and when you choose between these two maxims, the one that has a laid-back, reaming effect, where you allow things to slip and to slide, or you keep to the exactitude of what is required, does your loved ones know which one of those you choose? So let us then talk about another concept. We might be flying in the confines of the Rand Airport, but as soon as we're out of these confines, there is no air police. There are no traffic marshals that will be looking out to see whether or not you should be fined or be reprimanded. But there are judges out there, but it comes too late. There are real judges who might, in criminal prosecution, be the person deciding whether or not you complied. And there are also other judges who carry big checkbooks, the insurers. They issue fines, they issue penalties, and they may repudiate your claim. But the ultimate penalty for our non-compliance may well be paid not by us, but by our families. Having said all of that, there are a few examples that I want to mention, and no one really got terribly hurt in the examples that I'm going to mention. I think egos were significantly hurt. The first of these examples I will name Wat maak oom Kali daar. Now, the real person's name was Kali, but I'm not going to reference anything further. He is a person who used his own paraffin for his aircraft to run it on. He conducted his own pressure washers. He had his own views about the upkeep of his aircraft because it is his aircraft. Now, one concept that we quite often use is the word negligence. Now, the law attributes two parts to it. The first is, of course, foreseeability. Do I foresee that something might go wrong? And can I avoid it? Is part two. And the part I want to focus on, of course, initially is foreseeability, because when you can foresee, you are often do have an opportunity to avoid the consequences. Now, in this example of Wat maak oom Kali daar, there was a loss of torque problem that occurred in the beginning of December of a particular year. And the ultimate issue was it a matter of fuel contamination, running paraffin? Was it a P3 line leak? It was a PT6 engine on a Bonanza, I think, or a Malibu. There were a number of considerations. What was it? And he flew the aircraft to the AMO, and the AME wrote a WhatsApp. Loosely translated, good afternoon, Pratt & Whitney asks that we must first do a couple of tests from the manual. They suggest that we don't fly until they have not conducted some further investigation. So that is a WhatsApp, in this case, that goes to the pilot. The pilot flies his aircraft to the very airfield and where the AME is, and it's there. But Kali is impatient. It's December, it's holiday, there's a lot that has to be done. Now, during this time, he continues to fly the aircraft with this about 70% torque available, continues to fly. And after several low torque incidents, he decided to document the low torque problem in the flight folio. And you all know what that means. Once you document that, you have basically self-grounded. But that was not the attitude of Kali in the circumstances. So there you have it. The bottom blue line is where he marked up the torque problem, and you will see from the dates that it is the 6th of January that was documented. Now, it is not a model and suggestion that you complete your records in this fashion. This problem had started in the beginning of December. It was only written up on the 6th of January. Here you have another couple of entries. Despite the writing up of that torque problem, there were several further flights, but they were not all jotted up. And it seems that some of these were deleted as well. That was ultimately conceded, that those deletions occurred. Now, the shade-in data of the aircraft or of the engine showed evidence of the further flights that had been undertaken. And regrettably, despite having self-grounded his aircraft, he continued to fly on several occasions, and it ended up in a very unfortunate landing amongst his own maize crops. The opinion of an expert witness was obtained. You met him earlier today. It was Charlie. I'm told that he left. So Charlie wrote his opinion and gave a proper explanation with reference to the legal principles as to why it was wrong. The claim, of course, is against his own insurance company because he wants to be paid out for the damage to the aircraft because this was certainly an accident. And the question is now, ought he have been paid out? And the simple policy wording, the due diligence clause in his policy, brought the matter to an end and the finding was made against him. So the short story is that if one had simply followed the most basic of rules, there's a problem, there's a suggestion by WhatsApp that you don't fly, you write up the talk problem, continue flying, and then the inevitable happens. And then you seek to sue someone. I thought the advice to him should have been different and that he should take ownership of his own losses. Well, ultimately, that was the decision of someone else. So that is one example of where the law did not forgive the conduct of a particular owner or pilot. There's another example that I want to use. And as a lawyer, when you look at the documents that you receive, we sometimes go and have a look at the original documents because we get the poorest quality documents very often. But it is quite helpful to go and have a look at the actual file or the actual documents or the maintenance records. And what struck me on this one instance is how it was without any blemish. Now, I've done a pre-flight in my life, and everything you write up after that has blemishes on it. There's just no way of keeping a page absolutely clean. In this case, there was an engine change that happened. It was on an air tractor. The FCU was borrowed from the aircraft for a short while and put on a different aircraft just to help out. And the person apparently promised that it was put back appropriately. After that, a full MPI had been done. Afterwards, dual signatures were done. Ground runs were perfect. A test flight was conducted by a very experienced pilot. It flew perfectly. It flew perfectly for the first 46.4 hours. The pilot who test flew it had 18,000 hours and came across as a meticulous person. Of course, he would have done a pre-flight. Of course, he would have done all of the necessary, and he made a very, very favorable impression on the finder of fact, which was an arbitrator. But the flights that were conducted with this aircraft were mostly done hugging the ground by about 50 feet and hugging contours. Only for, at 46.5 hours, there to have been a sudden loss of power and a spooling down of the engine to idle. And what it seemed to have happened afterwards is that the FCU lever connecting rod had become disconnected, and the linkage was, in other words, loose and returned to the idle position. So no throttle input would do anything. The matter was run in English, and one had to get your census about you and study what all these things are called. And we were told that this one little part is called a split pin or a cotter pin. Another part is called a castellated nut. There was a bolt that had a hole drilled through it, and then the nut would be wound up, and it would be torqued, and then there would be an alignment between the castellations, and then the split pin would be paced through, and then it would be bent over in a very particular way, all in accordance with a particular service bulletin. And there you have it. Those were the specific parts that had to be included. all of that to complete the assembly in terms of the service bulletin. But as I say, the matter was run in English, but everyone has rights. And the witness who was to be cross-examined, one of the AMEs, insisted on being cross-examined in Afrikaans. So as if the English words weren't enough of a problem, one needed to then get the correct technical terms of things like a torque wrench or a castellated nut. And it was quite easy, and people immediately piped up to say that the Afrikaans for a torque wrench is a wringsleutel, a very impressive word. But what gave everyone a bit more trouble was what to call a castellated nut. And upon the first use of the word a gekanteelde moer, the arbitrator burst out laughing. And there are perhaps more elegant ways of saying what it was, but it created a great deal of fun. What had happened here, it seemed, was that the split pin had not been placed. The part was apparently torqued, but the split pin never placed. And was this an instance on this clean paper of there being an ignorance or an irritation at the silly paperwork which could conveniently be done at the end of the MPI after inspection? I think it creates a harsher reality when you see how these things are signed off and signed out. Here's an example of the castellated nut concerned, and the arrow points to a proper assembly where the split pin is bent back in the appropriate way on the FCU lever. Here you have the first instance where you see the signature up top of the AME, as well as the inspector stamp and signature at the bottom of the page. And again, you see how the workman's signature is appended and the inspector's signature was appended. These signatures related to the specific item concerned. Now, it is simply put unforgivable to do this. And it can happen when you don't meticulously follow the silly little rules that are there. The end point was this. Fortunately, the pilot came away unscathed, but at significant loss to the entity concerned. Oh, and the size of the split pin. I was told they cost 25 cents. So. Another example, and we spoke about it a bit earlier, we had a lot of rain over the recent past, and Buzz told us about the mist that or the fog that he had on his way in. And what it does, of course, it creates an anxiety. Operationally it does, for corporate entities it does, because you need to fly, and the hours are lost, machines stand idle, and money is not earned. And so it happened in a particular case where there was bad weather for several days, but a ferry flight had to take place to somewhere north of Angola. And after 3 days of incessant rain, there was a break in the clouds and excitement reigned, passports were stamped, and the pilots set off having checked their favorite weather apps. And I mean weather apps. So they realized that the weather, the system that was moving north would have been in their way in a way, but they knew that they could perhaps circumnavigate it and make a plan. 2 aircraft took off, they kept in touch, but they later on developed their own ideas and went their own separate ways in order to get to the end point. VFR pilots in aircraft not equipped for flight in IMC. And what you will see, not the magenta line, which is drawn by me, but you will see a red line firstly from Lanseria going south. And you can clearly see how the weather was sought to be circumnavigated. And ultimately, the incident occurred in weather that enveloped one of the pilots, bringing him to a terrible end. He went into square kilometers of bad weather and in the most unfortunate circumstances. This is a witness who saw some of the last parts holding a stick representing the area in which he saw the aircraft pass, and a snapshot of a video of where it regrettably ended. The test pilot in the other case, the meticulous man, piloted this aircraft and came to his end here. That's how small the world is. Let's talk about buying aircraft. I found the Namibian story quite fascinating, and it resonates in part with what I'm going to share with you now. Now, buying an aircraft, very often it's financed. Very often there is a retention of ownership of the aircraft so that the new owner starts paying, and transfer of ownership will only happen at a later point in time. And if you're ignorant about what the law requires, you might not know about this part of Part 47. What it basically says, as I'm sure most of you know, is on day 31, after the passing of ownership, the aircraft is in effect grounded. In the case I'm talking about now, the person bought a helicopter, decided that he might at one point require a bigger, better machine, and decided not to register the aircraft into his name, not knowing about this provision. So that much the court accepted. But following day 31 of taking ownership but not registering it with the CAA, he undertook about 100 illegal flights. But then ultimately knocked on the door of his broker and knocked on the door of his insurer to make good payment for the illegal flight that occurred. He did not succeed. That's not the only part of the pattern of ignorance that one sees. The flight was also conducted, but the case never got there. In circumstances where he, as a VFR pilot, flew without visual reference to the ground. And when the inevitable happened and there was a crash, of course, everything separates. Several parts, pieces is all over the place. Also the battery. And that's where the clock stopped at 1941 local time. And immediately you might ask, was it set appropriately? Is it correct? Is it not? Well, the case never got there because the court refused his claim on the basis of his illegal flights in consequence of not having registered the aircraft appropriately. Now, let me leave you with pre-flights again, and let's talk about the accuracy of a timepiece in the aircraft. I think it's one of the first things that you know, one of the easiest things ultimately, and that is that the aircraft must be equipped with a timepiece. Of course, we have wristwatches, cell phones, iPads, all showing exact time. Some of you might even have the latest Top Gun watch by IWC also. Accurate time beyond accuracy. Now, I don't have to read to you what Part 91 says about the requirement of an accurate timepiece. You know it all off by heart. My question to you is rather a different one. if I start asking you questions about the accurate timepiece, would you give me the answer that you would give in an exam? Or would you give me the answer of what you would do if you're quite anxious to get to the GF or get on with the job? Do you have operational constraints, and what do you do? Can you fly? Can you not fly? What if that timepiece has a dysfunctional setting knob, so that you're quite convinced because you did your pre-flight and you went back and you saw that, you know, on your fancy watch, 10 minutes had passed, and so did the time in the helicopter, so 10 minutes had passed, but the time is set the wrong time of day. Are you happy that that is a functional timepiece in the aircraft? Can you go or can you not? Or different still, you're quite sure that it keeps time accurately and you can do the math and you can tell what time of day it is by doing some subtraction or addition. What if something goes wrong and the battery separates and the clock stops at 4:15 and you don't have a night rating? And you're all on your own where no one is looking over you and there's no air traffic police looking after you. At what time did it happen? And do you choose to suggest that you should never have taken off because you don't have an appropriately accurate timepiece? Or do you try and win that case the other way around? These small little things don't seem to matter, but at a point they may. Now, Buzz said earlier, let's not aim for the minimum in what we do. I want to suggest a couple of things to you. If you are doing a pre-flight because the law says you must, I suggest that you stop flying. If yours is a second signature on a worksheet, and it's simply there because the law requires it, I suggest it's time to go. And I think what causes a lot of this is that once you complete your training, once you leave the environment that we have here, Lunel spoke about safety as a team effort. The moment that you start operating solo and on your own, and only on your own farm, and only on your own terms, that is where complacency sets in. Doing it on your own breeds complacency. I agree with Terry when he said, it's about how we interact. I want to, and I'm sure you will teach me this, that aviation is dynamic. If you are not part of a fraternity, people that look out for one another, again, I suggest you join one or you stop. Coming back to judges, there are different judges. Some judges wear robes. Other judges have checkbooks. I spoke of them. They're the insurers. But the most consistent of all judges is Mother Nature. She never applies the de minimis rule. She always applies the ignorantia legis neminem excusat rule. She will not forgive you your mishaps in certain circumstances. She will not forgive you if you ignore her. And then perhaps lastly, I told you that there's one law that is supreme in all of aviation. And obedience of this law as the most important law has to be absolute. There is no excuse not to consider it. But despite what you might think, it happens to be a natural law, the law of gravity. I suggest that is the most important law, as you will have seen BC was taught. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Emiel. Are there any questions? I think this is very relevant for particularly the operators that are here and the pilots. Perhaps the obligations and the consequences for when we ignore these type of stuff. Emiel, I mean, perhaps I can open by you perhaps just giving us a bit of background. What is the pilot's legal stance if he does ignore something and an operator, for example, expected him to act in a specific manner and something goes wrong?
You are the PIC.
I think perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, in the worst case scenarios, it can have an influence on your estate and what is left behind to your loved ones. I think, am I correct in saying that?
Yes, of course. I think there could be so many consequences. The moment that you, under operational pressure, might feel that you need to undertake the flight in circumstances where it's not necessarily safe. There are a lot of protections for you, there are contracts and so on, but there are certain things that we are not immune to. If we cause a loss of life as a result of a decision we take, if we cause injury to others where we are grossly negligent, then in those circumstances, the law will come after us. There's no document that will protect you from that prosecution. And that is regrettably how it should be. So when you have pressure or you believe that you have pressure, and I think that's the biggest problem. I think we often believe that we have pressure to undertake a certain flight. I'd rather take it up with those who employ you and suggest that the circumstances are not ideal, offer any other way in which you might possibly help. But if you knowingly undertake that flight and it leads to loss of life or injury or significant damage, you will not be off the hook for certain parts, criminal parts in particular. You might have insurance protection that helps you with that. Your insurer might not help you with that. So it's treacherous ground. I would suggest to you that you seek to steer clear of such circumstances.
Any other questions?
Sure. Thank you very much for that presentation. I've got two questions. First question is, can we get 10 free phone calls to you per annum as the police?
Absolutely.
Where we can ask questions without charge.
You're not allowed to call, but I'll meet you here.
Oh, great. I'll buy the coffee. The issue of the timepiece, we all looked at each other here because it's been very controversial. It's a long story. We can talk about it over coffee. On your primary FMS system, your display, you've got time indicated on there. Does that count as the timepiece that's that is referred to there in the legislation, or must it be an independent timepiece with its own power? For example, if your display fails, then you still have
I'd suggest that my understanding of the rule is that it has to be fitted. It must be equipped. Yeah. It has to be fitted.
But the argument now from the other side is that it's fitted. It's there on your display. And we're saying it's not fitted. It's on your display. If your display goes, then you don't have a timepiece.
I'd ask my AME what he says, and is there a dual signature that it is appropriately fitted and compliant with the service bulletin? So, yeah, those make for very difficult things. And I know that the topic that I raised there is quite controversial, because if you have an inoperative timepiece on a police helicopter, that's a big issue if everything else works. But there are other detours that the police might possibly take If that blue light is static and not spinning, and the law requires that, you have certain rights when it gets to emergencies, but I'd suggest that you don't rely on that, because that is a defense to a charge and will not necessarily exonerate you.
Will you have the coffee?
Just at the back, Uncle Bruce.
So on 121 machines and 23 and 25 machines, you have to have a separate chronometer. It's a no-go item. You do get relief on an MEL, depending what systems you have. The most I know of is 7 days. Otherwise, it has to be fixed.
Thank you very much.
Hi there, Emil. Firstly, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a helicopter operator and a helicopter pilot. And it's a broader question, but perhaps actually comes back to that timepiece question. And your opinion, I'm asking, it is my opinion that our air law is extraordinarily badly written and badly set out in a lot of places, maybe not all places. I just wanted to test you on that, see what you think in your experience with operating within this law.
Do I understand your question correctly, that in many places the law is not set out clearly?
Yeah, and I think extraordinarily badly written in that it's not clear and the way it's set out.
Yeah.
And we get into fights with CIA and ourselves about how we interpret the law, how they interpret the law. And yeah, that's I'm just asking how you feel about that.
No, well, that, the beneficial part of that, of course, for lawyers is that there will be arguments about those points, but that's certainly not a gratifying position to be in. It is truly a pity that many of these laws are not that clear. And it creates, of course, opportunity for people to seek what they consider to be a loophole, and for others to overreach as part of the authority in order to try and enforce something that's not truly there. And I think the better way of dealing with those things, especially if it's a material issue, is to protect yourself with an opinion. And that protection is perhaps the way to go forward, because so that you will not intentionally have broken the law. If you have an opinion that supports you, and I don't suggest you shop around until you get the one you like, but that might be of some value, especially if it's a topic that could be very costly in the end. I hope that answers.
Emiel van Vuuren.